Joining me from Washington is David Nakamura, White House reporter for The Washington Post. All right, so David, the president once again dismissed the Russia investigation by focusing on news that the Clinton campaign partially funded the infamous dossier on him. He called that a disgrace. What is the strategy here by the White House?
Well, I think, Elaine, what you're seeing is the president obviously feeling the pressure in light of this story that this indictment could be unsealed as soon as this week, and he's lashing out on Twitter and trying to politicize this investigation again. The issue of the dossier, which has been sort of public for almost a year now, there were some new details in my newspaper about who funded that and connection with a lawyer connected to the Clinton campaign. And so the president is trying to say, look, this is evidence that this entire Russian investigation is just a political scheme, which is not true in any way. The allegations included in that dossier, as people know, run from the sort of serious to the salacious. Some of that's been made public. Not all of it's been confirmed. But what we do know is that even at the time, the FBI was interested enough in the sort of material that was being collected by the former British intelligence agent that they considered themselves funding it. They did not. But now you're seeing the president latch on to that to try to sort of muddy this entire thing. But I think the bigger point is that this indictment, if it is unsealed this week, and we do see whether it's Manafort or somebody lower on the food chain, it is probably likely that it's just the tip of the investigation, and that this is just the start of potentially more charges to come.
And the president seemed to suggest that Republicans will unite in their anger against the Russia investigation. Is there evidence of that? Well,
you showed a clip of Trey Gowdy saying that no, he believes that this should continue. It's a very sensitive issue because Mueller does have such a pristine reputation from both parties as somebody who does things by the books. There have been some leaks, but not that many since he took over the investigation from Comey. And, of course, in the Justice Department, Jeff Sessions has recused himself, moved aside, and that angered Trump. But you're seeing a number of Republicans, even ones who've supported this president, say that they don't favor, just abruptly ending this, even as the White House tries to say there's no there, and that this thing is winding to a close. So I think it's hard for Republicans to take a stance against a former FBI leader like Robert Mueller, who does have a lot of sweeping powers right now and seems to be doing a very methodical investigation. I think as soon as you see some of the charges come forward, more details will come out. It may lead to more impetus to keep this thing going. But certainly the president is not going to let up on his attacks.
So setting aside Congressman Trey Gowdy, there are renewed calls by some other Republicans for Mueller to step down. What is the argument for that?
Well, I mean, obviously, clearly, it's sort of been politicized, and the president continues to say that he himself is not central to the not being investigated. But in the end, I think Republicans have to make a decision whether they think there's merit there. And ultimately, the questions here is whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians, and it's already been established by the intelligence committees that Russia did try to meddle in the election to help Trump, and I think that ultimately is what we need to find out more about. The president's role, his campaign's role, his contact with Russian officials clearly is an important part of that, but ultimately this is a bigger question about how a foreign government attempted to intervene in a democracy, and that ultimately is the most important aspect. So I think if senators and other politicians are saying that we should stop this without knowing the full facts, that's really a hard position to maintain.
What about Republican Trey Gowdy, the leader of the House's top investigative committee, slammed special counsel Robert Mueller for allowing the news of charges to come out. What about that point?
Well, we don't know exactly how that came out, but it is a good point in that. But you've seen the president and his allies try to take the focus away from the actual investigation and say it's about, undermining his presidency. It's a political scheme by Democrats and his rivals, and that's why you're seeing the leaks. And they've tried to say that the leaks themselves are damaging to the republic and potentially a criminal act. The president himself has tweeted for months now about that people should investigate the leakers, investigate the Clinton campaign for trying to undermine him. And so I think anytime in Washington when you have these kind of leaks that are going to continue, even though they've been fewer since Mueller took over, you're going to have sort of the other side say, look, this is an example of why this investigation is simply, as Trump himself said on Twitter today, a witch hunt. And really aimed at sort of just undermining him politically, even if there's not a lot there.
I mean, to be clear, though, David, just give us a sense. Leaks like this were not really expected under this particular special counsel. He's known for running a really tight ship.
He does. It sounded like, from my understanding, that these leaks came after members of the Mueller team spoke on Capitol Hill, and we don't know exactly where the leaks are coming from. I mean, it could be broader than even just the the Mueller team and the investigators. It could be beyond, yeah, and I hate to speculate
right now about
that,
but yeah,
exactly, the origin of that. So I think in Washington, the more people know about it, the more things will get out. And I think once there's action taken, such as a pending indictment like this, that's another sense of a broader number of people knowing what's happening and maybe coming out. But it is damaging to certainly those who are conducting an investigation if things leak out before they're publicly announced.
Meanwhile, details of the Republican tax plan will be unveiled on Wednesday, and the president brought it up on Twitter, writing, quote, "All of this Russia talk right when the Republicans are making their big push for historic tax cuts and reform. Is this coincidental? Not." So how much, David, will the Russia investigation hamper, you think, the legislative push on tax reform?
Well, like we've seen pretty much throughout this president's tenure, issues outside of the policy that they're trying to advance tend to take up a lot of the attention in Washington.
Right.
I don't know that ultimately it will affect their push for tax reform or necessarily even the votes that they try to line up. I mean, I think more broadly, you've seen people like Bob Corker and others speak out against the president's behavior and the sort of discourse and the tone and his personal ethics. And that, in the end, could, maybe be a bigger issue, and it could be a narrow margin for this tax bill to move forward. But I think that this president continues to operate on a couple different planes. You've seen some polling now out that says that he's starting to wear away his base support a little bit, which has always been his trump card in the end, holding on to that base. But I think both the Republicans on the Hill and the leadership and the president himself understand that for the legislative agenda of the Republican Party, this is a very important moment. And I think you'll see the leadership continue to try to focus like a laser on that. McConnell and Paul Ryan have tried to sort of stay out of sort of the day-to-day fray in reacting to what the president's tweeting or the ongoing investigations, saying that they're focused on the Republican agenda and helping their constituents.
All right, David Nakamura in Washington for us. David, thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.